One of the key distinctions that Sartre raises in his Being and Nothingness is the distinction between sadism and masochism. They're both forms of bad faith, and I want to address what they are and then see if we can talk a little bit about how those relate to subject position and the contemporary identity politics that we see all around us. Sadism, and before I address maybe sadism and masochism, I think there is a basic problem that Sartre addresses when he turns in his discussion to concrete relations with others, and he talks about the distinction between being for self and being for others. Now, being for self and being for others is that the simplest way to say this is that you never know if you have a beautiful or an ugly face. Your face is somehow for others. It flees from you. It flees from you. Look around. You can see everyone's face but your own. And even when you can't see your own face, you can look in the mirror, you can look in the video. You don't know if it's beautiful or ugly. It depends upon the other who's looking at you. And so when I start to deal with the distinction between being for self and being for others, we start to realize this distinction between being what's sometimes called a subject in the world who looks outwardly toward the world. I see the world as a field of possibilities, and those possibilities are all in relation to me. They're oriented toward my outward directedness toward them. That's very different than the way I appear to be simply one more thing amidst the things in the world where people can see the back of my head and they can see the whole of me, and I look like I'm just an object in the world. Now, I am an object in the world and others disclose that part of me, but that part of me flees from me. It's my being for others. But there is a being that's for me, right? My orientation, my flight toward the world. Bad faith of sadism and masochism come from reducing or denying either one of those. And it's almost like people flee from the problem of being both for oneself and for others by trying to tackle it with a kind of sadism or a masochism. The sadist is someone who could be described as the unseen seer. It's the person who's looking but not looked at. The sadist is the person who says, I don't care what other people think of me. I am who I say I am, and that's all that I am. What I think of me is who I am. If I think I have a beautiful face, or if I think I have an ugly face, that's what my face is. None of that relates to me what other people think. The masochist says almost the opposite of that. The masochist is, or they say, I'm nothing other than what people say I am. They're the unlooking looked at. They're the non-seeing seen, right? They're not seeing, they're just seen objects. And they seem to believe that if others tell them they have a beautiful face, then it really is beautiful, and if others tell them that it's an ugly face, it really is ugly. Both of these are forms of bad faith, and the task is to learn how to manage both of them. I think it's probably not a surprise to anyone that there's lots of work that's been done on how identity and socio-political identity and different forms of subject position throughout the social world relate to these two modes of bad faith. Turns out that men and women, or different races, or within the workplace, or in socio-political arenas, there does seem to be some systematic breakdowns of who is more likely to become sadistic and who is more likely to become masochistic. Now, one last example or illustration of this, and then hopefully that will suffice for people. It's There was a listserv that I recently saw where someone had posted it was, I guess, a new website that had a listing of a bunch of pictures from some of the early founders of the field. And the pictures, when you just looked at them, it admittedly looked like a bunch of old white men. That's what it looked like, old white men, and or most of them anyway. And someone commented on this immediately. They posted it and said, "Oh boy, look at this! It looks like the old men, old white men club." And I thought, yeah, it does look pretty bad. And then somebody chimed in right away, and they went, "Oh, this is not fair at all." They thought this is not right. This person, in fact, was a persecuted person of Jewish descent. This person was Polish and was an immigrant, and they started to give all these different backgrounds and how some had perhaps more varied and diverse histories than were being recognized just by the pictures. I think that's a very insightful comment, and it's sort of reverberating against what could be called the other attributed subject position. Now, a person comes out and gives a self-asserted, right? So there's two kinds of subject position that emerge out of this response of sadism and masochism, of facticity and transcendence, right? It's the self-asserted subject position and the other attributed. So when those other attributed subject positions of old white men came, the self-asserted position came out, and the person said, "Oh no, that's not really fair." Um, these people are actually more varied than appears. As insightful as I thought that was, and I do think it was very insightful, there's something that needs to be dialectically redressed there, because I think, as true as it was in this case, it maybe covers over, in a kind of sadistic way, the extent to which different kinds of racism are perpetuated from the outside in and then become inside out. One of the more insightful books on this is called Bad Faith and Anti-Black Racism by Lewis Gordon. And what Lewis Gordon is doing is suggesting that there are certain kinds of racism that are largely a kind of other attributed racism, where it's not simply that, when your subject position is, when you blend in, but then you can self-assert it in order to show that you're really different, is so different when other attributed subject positions won't even allow you to give the sense of your blending in. There's a great part where Gordon, and I think he's citing Frantz Fanon, who was again very impacted by Sartre, and the dialogue between Fanon and Sartre is very rich. But in his Fact of Blackness, he says, don't ever treat me as if I'm black, but don't ever forget that I'm black. Now, to some people, this may sound contradictory, but this is a person struggling for good faith amidst a world where tons of people are in bad faith. The truth is that we are things, but we're also more than those things. I think part of the usefulness of the concept of sadism and masochism is to suggest that no one really gets the last word on who we are. I don't get the last word on who I am. Other people don't get the last word on who I am. The struggle that sometimes goes on in bad faith is as if one of the people gets to really decide who we really are. Either we are who we say we are, or we are who other people say we are. I think the movement toward good faith is to recognize that we're both of those and actually neither of them at the same time.